Hey, good evening or good morning or good afternoon. I don't know if that, do you say good afternoon? Yeah, that's a word. Whatever time you're listening to this podcast, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day. It's considered TV, right? Is that right? I'm guessing. We're live on the YouTube. Live on the YouTube. Not in Belarus, though. Told. For paper, you have to flatten it before you receive. I'm guessing they don't crush everything before they're collecting paper. Like 3D objects get routed away. If you leave your paper like a box, if you leave it assembled, the likelihood that it's going to get the pack goes down. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to listen to the people of packaging. Hey everybody, it's a wonderful day in the People of Packaging neighborhood. Shout out to EAJ, my 17-year-old child, for producing that wonderful, lovely intro. John, he just did, like the Spotify rap stuff. Did you do any of that, or like the Apple Music thing?
I listen to most of my music. I'm almost sad to admit on Amazon Music, and they don't really do much of a rap.
So this is his first year as a music producer, and he got his like artist, whatever it was. And he had like 71 countries he was played in. I was like, hey, congratulations. He loves to make beats and hip hop lyrics. And we have one rule, though. We've run one rule, John. No AI lyrics. I'm like, if you're going to do this, you have to write them from your brain. And he's like, I got you.
That's my rule for writing articles, too. No AI.
Oh, not mine. I just go to ChatGPT and spit it out. That's a good rule. Well, the voice that you hear is Jon Smieja. Did I nail it?
You did. You nailed it. Perfect.
Jon Smieja. Did you know, John? I was thinking about this when you said that, and I didn't tell this to you, but you know that I'm a pastor, and there is a word in Greek. No, is it Greek? No, it's Hebrew. The word for authority is shmiha, and it's a very fun word to say. And I have preached about this, and then also connected that to a Busta Rhymes song, and said, Shmiha, we've got you all in check. Even though, so I'm pulling everything together here.
A lot of people mispronounce my name, Shmiha. I should just let them do it from now on, I guess.
Yeah, John Authority. That's your, and you are an authority. Honestly, look at how I'm going to weave this thing together. It's called the weave. That we're going to weave this thing together. You are an authority on the circular economy. You're the VP of Circularity at Trellis Group. You have been doing this, according to LinkedIn.com, since March of 2022, and you are in St. Paul, Minnesota. Do I have all of your details correct?
Yes, Chile, St. Paul, Minnesota, and LinkedIn.com is correct.
Okay. And you have a fantastic beard, I must say. It's the salt and pepper feel is quite wonderful. I'm guessing for the winters in Minnesota, it comes in quite handy.
It does. It comes in handy unless it gets so cold that the beard or the mustache freezes outside. But I know you're a winter sports snowboarder, right? Do you still do that?
Yeah. It's not. That's not the best part about it. Is the freezing of the water and the sweat and snot occasionally just gets all mixed in and frozen on a mustache. If you're still listening to this podcast, thank you for making it through that particular part of the show. John, you and I, where did we meet at the Circularity conference in Seattle for the first time?
It was either there or an SPC conference in Boston.
I was also there.
One. Yeah.
They were both, I think, pretty cose together. I don't even know. So many conferences. Yeah. Well, tell me, what is it you say you do here at Inatech?
What was the other one? Oh, Penetrode. So at Trellis Group, we used to be called Green Biz. We rebranded over the summer to sort of reflect the expansion of our business. But we are a media and events company that supports the professional community in its fight against climate change. So We support mostly corporate practitioners in sustainability, innovation, circular economy, et cetera. And we do that through 3 different sort of lines of business. We have our in-person events. I organize our Circularity event. That's an annual event. It's coming up in Denver in 2025, April 29th to May 1st. Very excited. Denver.
We're in Denver, my friend.
We're going to be on they just built a new floor on the convention center, the Colorado Convention Center. So we're going to be in this brand new level of the convention center. It's beautiful, everything on one floor. We've got a huge outdoor terrace that overlooks the mountains. So great venue, downtown Denver for 2025. So I organized that event with my colleague and partner in crime, Corey Goldberg, who's in your neck of the woods. She lives in Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
And then I also run a subset of our peer learning network for people working at large corporations. We call it the Trellis Network, and it's mostly virtual meetings to hear from experts in various spaces of corporate sustainability, learn, connect with peers. That network was sort of set up initially because 15, 16 years ago, they were the only sustainability person working at their company, and so they felt like they were on this island. And so we sort of created a desert island for them to talk together instead of talking to themselves. And it's grown since then. And now we support a bunch of different sort of pieces of the sustainability team, whether it's nature and biodiversity, circular economy, communications, et cetera. So we have all these subgroups now, and I run the circular economy subgroup. And then lastly, I write for our website, trellis.net. So I write what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, case studies, news you can use for our audience around the circular economy.
And no AI is involved in the writing of those articles.
Yeah, although when I was in Korea for the INC5 Global Plastics Treaty negotiations, I didn't have an editor for my LinkedIn post, so I did admittedly use ChatGPT for some copy editing.
Yeah. I will. We are not going to talk much more about this after this particular point, but I do utilize I do utilize ChatGPT and AI for various things, including creating the show notes for the episode, helping me with an article based on the episode. It just, to me, it's an ability. It creates an ability for me to quickly scale the content, because if I didn't have that, then I'd have to, pay somebody to go and do it, because I'm not a skilled writer. That's a very difficult thing for me to do. So it takes a ton of time. So I do, and I put it out there, right? I'm like, let's see what the robots think I talked about on the episode, right? So I'm not trying to hide it. That's the worst, is when people are like, I'm trying to create this and I'm claiming it's mine. Like, just be honest. It's fine. We all know it's out there.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a humble brag or a cell phone, but I have a PhD in chemistry. So I did a lot of technical writing in graduate school, whether it was my dissertation or the papers I published. And so I struggle with brevity. Like, I just will put every single detail into a sentence. And that's another place where I think ChatGPT is helpful. It can sort of pare down my verbosity a bit.
Have you ever found, like, taken an old paper maybe that you wrote, if it's and then upload it to ChatGPT, but say, write this so that a sixth grader could understand it, and do it in a way that is satirical or something like that, right? Like, and it's incredible. It's not very accurate, by the way. Yeah. So you have to really you have to really proofread this stuff. But like, I find it, actually, I did one the other day just out of curiosity, and it was, rewrite the lyrics to OPP but by Naughty by Nature, but make it about packaging called Other People's Packaging. And it wrote a whole, now they weren't very good, and I would never record it, but I just made me laugh. I just thought it was pretty funny.
That is pretty funny. Just making the robot look dumb.
Yeah. And there are people out there who are intentionally creating thousands and thousands of fake websites with misinformation to keep AI dumb. It's like, we're like fighting. They're like the real superheroes out there. It's pretty funny. Okay, so you guys have, at Trellis Group, you've got events that you organize. I'm excited to hear more about the event in Denver, because that's my home state. I'm the proud owner of a Denver Nuggets championship tattoo, and so it's a thing that is near and dear to me. So what would somebody take away? Like, who are the types of people who go to these events or that you're looking to have attend an event like the one coming up in Denver in 2025?
Yeah, so we get a mix. It'll be probably about 1,500 people. A mix of, let's say, 50 to 60% folks that work in sustainability at large corporations. A lot of them have circular economy in their title now. We're seeing sort of a growing wave of people that are actually focused on circularity at their companies. And apologies, I use circularity and circular economy pretty interchangeably.
That's fine.
But yeah, so about half corporates. Then we get a really good sort of innovator startup community that comes to the event to try to talk to big companies about how they might employ some of the technologies that they're working on. As we just got off of, a growing number of those companies are working in AI and working on data to support the transition to a circular economy. And then the last sort of quarter of the audience is really governments and NGOs, the people that are sort of the voices or the policymakers in this space that are trying to push companies to do more. And the nice thing about our event is that it's geared towards the practitioner. A lot of the content is pretty in the weeds compared to some other conferences that I go to throughout the year. So we get a lot of practitioners. We get a lot of people from R&D teams, product design teams, supply chain teams that are interested in learning more about this. And we build content knowing that that's the community that's going to be there, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's an event that it's highly actionable is what I found, because like going to Circularity in Seattle versus COP28 in Dubai, to me it was like, this is overwhelming. I don't even know what to do. I just wandered around and like talked to people. There was just, and I'm sure there's a lot of other actions happening, but it seemed like there was just a lot of meetings taking place, and I'm sure there were a ton of stuff happening behind the scenes that I don't know anything about, right?
Yeah.
But the Circularity show was, or conference was like, I would sit down at lunch. I sat down and met, I just was like, hey, tell me what, and it was like Michael Dell's daughter, and she's like investing in climate tech startups, and it's like, whoa, that's incredible, right? Like it was so, or just like accidentally meet the head of sustainability for Mars or Walmart or whatever it might be, right? Like it was just a cool place because it was intimate enough that you would just meet people,
Yep.
and they are action makers and decision makers, action takers and decision makers in the space. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, and personally, I'm really bad at like advanced planning when I'm going to an event. So like I would be lost at Climate Week or a COP, right? Like I'm just so bad
Me
at,
too.
thinking ahead far enough to plan out my week. And so that's what I like about our conferences is we have various ways that you can plan ahead, or you can just show up, get the app, and figure out what you want to do on the fly because it's all in one building, right? You're
Yeah.
not wandering around a city. So that's fun.
Yeah, I was at Climate Week in New York, and I was like, wait, what? People were just like hitting me up like, hey, do you want to go to dinner? I'm like, sure. I didn't really know. I did an island cleanup, Burlington Island cleanup, in with Spearhead Project, and so that was really cool. So I had one thing to go do. I had some other meetings lined up, but it wasn't like, I literally went down to I went down to the UN building, and they were like, "Sir, you can't go in." I'm like, well, what else should I do? I'm like, felt like in Wayne's World, like I'm with the band. Like I had a media pass, and they were like, that doesn't get you in here. I'm like, well, then I don't know what else to do. So I just went back to my hotel. That was fun. All right. So you've mentioned a couple times now you came back from South Korea,
Yep.
and I think that's how we ended up connecting up. Was who was it? Somebody posted about the event, right?
Yeah, I think it was a comment I put on Robert Little from Google's LinkedIn post.
That's what it was. Yeah. So Google is a small internet startup. They do
Yeah,
like search and stuff. If
I don't know if
anybody's
people have heard
listening.
of them.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we don't, we just explain all of our terms.
It's kind of like Ask Jeeves,
It's-
if you're looking for an anchor point.
yeah, no, it's a little bit of a better version of Ask Jeeves, or Yahoo. So if you know those two, then you could probably go just Yahoo search google.com, and you'll probably find You'll find Robert. So tell me about this plastics treaty, and because I have so many questions about plastic packaging, looking forward into a world of EPR, and but also knowing about the CPG side of it. So I'm just curious, what was this plastics treaty about? Was anything treatitized? That's not a word. Was anything agreed upon? What was it? What was this event like?
Yeah, so the UN hosts these somewhat regular environment agency meetings, UNEA meetings, and back in 2022, the countries, about 180 countries, members of the UN, came together and passed a resolution to agree on a treaty to end plastic pollution. That's the goal of the treaty. And when that happened in March of 2022, they had this very aggressive timeline to have 5 negotiating meetings across the course of 2 years that would end December 1st, 2024 in South Korea. And so they went through the course of these 5 meetings, trying to slowly hone in and find convergence and agreement on all the different ways that this treaty might address plastic pollution. And in Busan, South Korea, a couple weeks ago, the goal was to say, okay, so we went into that meeting with what they call a compilation text, everything that had come out of the first 4 meetings. It was like 80 pages long, and it had what happens in the UN process is they put brackets around things that aren't agreed upon that are sort of options, and it was just bracket after bracket after bracket. And so the chair of the committee, the guy from Ecuador, he said, okay, we can't work with this big 80-page document. So he wrote a shorter version of it that sort of tried to pull the main points out of the long document and pitched at the beginning.
Probably used ChatGPT, by the way.
Probably, yeah. That would have been a good use of ChatGPT, actually. So he came to INC5 with this shortened paper that was about 19 pages long and said, okay, I think this is where we should start negotiations so we have a chance to finish in our originally scheduled time of December 1st. And with some concessions by a few companies, he was able to get that across the finish line, and they started negotiating from this shorter paper. But what quickly became clear through the week in Busan was that the high ambition countries, so this is largely the South American and Central American countries, Africa, the European Union, and then a smattering of countries from elsewhere in the world, including Canada and Mexico. The High Ambition Coalition really wants things like a production cap on plastics, especially related to single-use plastics. They want lists of chemicals and materials of concern that would be phased out over time. And they want a strong financial mechanism so that every country, no matter what their means are, can participate and address their own plastic pollution in their country. That is a lot of times there's an overburden on the small island developing nations because they get plastic washing up on their shores every day.
Yep.
So that's what the High Ambition Coalition wants. And then there's this group they call themselves the like-minded countries, which is a little bit humorous when you're on the ground. But the like-minded countries include the petrostates. So most of the Arab nations, Russia,
US.
the US is actually not part of that, oddly.
Oh, interesting. We're a pretty big oil producer.
We are, and I'll get to the US in just a second. So the like-minded countries don't want any of that. They want the treaty to basically start at the point when a plastic product becomes waste. So they want the treaty to only be a waste management treaty. So let's increase funding for waste management. Let's advance recycling. Let's figure out ways to keep plastics out of the environment. That's their stance. And when you're sitting in the room with these two divergent opinions, you quickly see like this is not going anywhere fast.
Right.
So throughout the course of the week, sort of hope diminished. By the last night, everybody knew that this wasn't going to happen in Busan like it was supposed to. And basically, the treaty discussions ended with non-ending. The chair got everyone to agree to come back sometime in 2025 at a date and time and location that are yet to be announced to pick up negotiations where they left off. So it's going to be an INC 5.2. And interestingly, you mentioned the US. So the U.S. is sort of in the middle of this negotiation. The U.S. doesn't ratify treaties. It's really hard for the U.S. Congress to ratify a treaty because you need 2/3 of the vote, and all these things to happen. So the U.S. tends to take a little bit more of a moderate role when it comes to vocalizing their opinion, but they do a lot of behind door meetings trying to push people towards where their stance would be in negotiating. And I think in this case, the U.S. truly is sort of in the middle.
Yeah,
They're
that
not
makes sense.
advocating vocally for production cuts, but they're also not on this like, oh, it's only end of life consideration. So they're a little bit in the middle, and we'll see what happens in 2025 with the new administration and new negotiators. But
Got it.
long story short, we got almost nowhere. A little bit of progress, but still big gaps between the two divergent sides on this.
So, if kind of like in a, I'm a public school graduate, John. So, I try to think of things, in kind of simplistic terms. Um, there's a lot of really smart public school graduates. So apologies to anybody out there who is part of that. But I'm right there with you. So, you have one side that's like the problem is in I guess primarily the production of the single use plastics, and we need to um, curb production. And the other people are saying it's not the production. Plastics are fine. They do a lot of good things, but we just can't manage them. But if we
Yep.
could manage them, then this miracle material could continue to exist or whatever it is, right? Is that kind of the tension?
Yeah, that's mostly the tension, and I think the side, and I tend to agree a little bit with the high ambition side that we can address the current plastics challenge with waste management alone, right? Like
Mhm.
there's just too much. If you go to most of the global south, it's a decidedly different story on waste management than we have here in North America, and they have a long ways to go to be able to actually control this stuff and keep it out of the environment. So that's the big separation is upstream and downstream versus only downstream.
Right.
And they've both sort of drawn red lines in those positions at this point.
Yeah, I had Andrew Almack on. I don't know if you've met him before. He's a Canadian who lives in India, and he runs an organization called Plastics for Change. And he really
Yeah.
highlighted a lot of the struggle. Now they have a company that sells essentially fair trade certified PCR from India, where they pay the waste collectors who are, this isn't a in India, especially in other parts of the global south, it is people who are picking this stuff up,
Yeah.
and they are being, they're being mistreated. They're not paid. And so he has established a way to connect with industries in the US to buy certified PCR from there so that he can pay them a living wage, so that there's a level of decency to this job and sort of self-worth assigned to it. It's pretty cool, but it's a totally different thing. You're right, than what I think we see in Europe or in the US, where by and large you don't see a ton of plastic pollution in and around your daily life. But I do travel to India quite a bit, and I take a 5-hour train ride when I go from Chennai to Andhra Pradesh, and you just see plastic pollution littered
Yeah.
everywhere. I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's it's everywhere there. So
And those waste pickers are mostly picking this stuff out of illegal dump sites, right? It's very
right.
dangerous work. Those things catch fire. They have, toxic fumes. Yeah, it's the waste pickers have actually been one of the sort of outside stakeholder groups in this whole process. There's an international waste pickers sort of union
Mm,
that obviously not all waste pickers are part of because a lot of them are very informal, right? So there's them, there's indigenous communities, there's youth groups, like there's all these external stakeholders that are trying to pull for high ambition too. And the one thing I didn't mention is that of the like 180 countries that are negotiating this treaty, over 100 of them are on this high ambition side. So they've got the majority, but the UN process works on consensus.
mm.
And so basically the terminology that gets thrown around a lot at the UN is nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. And right now nothing is agreed.
Got it. Got it. And that was the outcome. I guess thinking about the things that maybe people who might be listening to this podcast can start to process, um, is I have been trying to follow as best I can a lot of the EPR laws, and it does seem like there is a sense where governmental ambition is outpacing the ability for the market to accept what governments want to have happen. And we're seeing a lot of pushback, right? I mean, companies set these ambitious goals and then they have to push them out. And now it seems like government saying, no, no, that you can't do that anymore. So we're going to set the goals for you. But I was thinking about this because looking at like California's law or like New Jersey's PCR law,
Yep.
and you start to do the economics around it, and you're like, what are we going to put food in? I mean, in 8 years, and it's like, oh well, it's 2032, and I'm like, well, 2016 was 8 years ago. Does that seem like a long time? Like 8 years is going to happen, especially if you start innovating brand new products that do not exist on the marketplace. It just seems like we're going to be at another impasse
Yeah.
with a lot of these laws, maybe similar to what happened in South Korea. Is there any hope that these things are going to make the type of difference that I think candidly they need to make? Because we're trying to solve real problems, and I don't know. It seems like industry and the market is constantly pushing for lower cost, like reduce inflation. We need lower costs. And then you have Oregon's EPR bill that's coming out. And I was talking to a company, and this is a into the seven figures amount of money we're gonna have to pay to this state. And I don't think that people are going to take we can't just absorb that cost, and people aren't gonna take the inflationary price increase. So it feels like we're at this weird sort of
Yeah.
precipice of time that I don't really know what's gonna happen. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to agree. I think I always think of sort of policy and these sort of requirements as the father of innovation, right? Like right now, I think what's challenging for companies, especially in the consumer packaged goods space, that want to be innovative or have innovative ideas, the challenge is that there's no level playing field, right? Nobody else, if everybody else is not innovating, then they're not going to pay to innovate. And so I do think there are some real innovation challenges ahead with materials and beyond materials, even business models, right? Like how do we sort of foster a reuse economy that used to be the thing and is
Mhm.
no longer the thing? So how do we rebuild a reuse economy? How do we remove unnecessary packaging that in some cases is just there so that you can get your brand on a shelf, right?
Yep.
Like there's that issue. So I think there are some ways that we can make real progress. And I think where I get a little bit uneasy maybe is that, are the policies pushing too hard, or is it a necessity that they push that hard so that people do something? Um, because we've seen other policies that didn't really require much of anybody other than reporting, and when it just comes down to reporting, then companies spend all their time and energy on reporting and none of it on innovation.
Right.
And so I think on the whole, I see this policy movement as a plus.
Mhm.
What I would like to see more of, especially in the case of packaging EPR, is coupling it with new bottle bills, new sort of deposit return systems, because we haven't seen a new one of those in like 30 years, and they're very
Right.
effective in increasing recycling rates in the states where they exist. So, coupling EPR with other policies that are helpful. Also standardizing some of these EPR policies across states, because if you look at the 5 states that have packaging EPR now, they're all pretty different.
They're all different. Yeah.
And so I think there's a need for some standardization, which some organizations are working on, sort of hosting conversations with the states that are currently pitching new EPR bills, to try to standardize the language a little bit and come up with a template. So standardization, coupling with things like bottle return systems, and then, I think that the companies, what I hear from companies when I'm at things like the INC meetings or when they come to my conference, is that they all want global standards.
Yes.
And once they have global standards, then they know their direction forward. And I think that's the challenge for all of them right now, is they're sort of swimming in this uneasy, unknowing future. and they just need more clarity. And you'll
Yep.
hear that from a lot of the companies that are leading consumer packaged goods
Yeah, I
providers.
mean the idea of what's going to be happening in the US, which is like state by state EPR laws, is just it's a reporting struggle. It can become a production struggle. You're not going to have separate packaging for each state, and so
Yep.
really like the more difficult state is going to become sort of the federal standard, but is that even the right standard to be?
Yep.
There's just so many questions. And then if you are, God forbid, you also are in Europe and you have to navigate that, and then you're in South America, you're in Africa, you're in Asia. It's like all of these standards become very, very difficult
Yeah.
for the brands to manage, and that does impact packaging. It impacts waste. I mean, if you think about it, you can end up generating a tremendous amount of waste through inefficiencies and sort of this like fragmented standardization across the board. And so I agree. I just wish it would, we would have a federalized policy that would be set so that everybody knows it and we can move forward, right? That would be fantastic. I don't anticipate that's going to happen in the next 4 years,
Nope.
or potentially ever. I don't really know, but I think if enough industry people sort of come together and say, not like the UN where it's like, hey, it's everything or nothing, but if enough big organizations, as much as people love to hate on them, but they can generate change.
Yep.
And there are really incredible people working in these like Robert at Google, right? Like he's an incredible person within this space. And I think that if they can apply their their power to help create some standardization,
Yes.
I think that would be awesome. And it's cool that they get to meet up at places like Circularity, honestly, where they can meet and they can share ideas and they can learn from other people, and it's a really cool collaborative space.
And one more thing I'll add on the policy front is I think in some cases the innovations exist, and they just haven't scaled yet. And I think that's one way that policy can be a driver, right? Is if we can start to scale some of the innovations that do exist in packaging, then the costs come down, then it starts to be more reasonable over time. But I think there's a big challenge out there. Nobody really wants to be the first mover on some of these new technologies for packaging, and so maybe policy helps force that a little bit too.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, John, we are here at 32 minutes, and I really hope that people are loving this, and they're like, no, don't stop. So maybe we'll have to do a second episode,
Yeah.
just to kind of hear more about it, because I think a lot of this stuff it's just shifting and moving. And obviously with Trellis Group, you guys are right at the heartbeat of everything that's happening as just an industry organization it's creating synergies and also reporting on what it is that's happening. So I think it's been wonderful. It's been super helpful for me, to hear. I've sent people your way to say, hey, this is an organization that is trustworthy, and they're sharing what's happening. So I really appreciate all the work that you guys are doing.
Well, I
Um,
appreciate you asking me on, Adam. It's fun.
yeah, how do people follow you or hear more about what you're doing at Trellis?
Most of what I do that's public is either going to be on LinkedIn.com, as you mentioned, or Trellis.net is where all of our content lives.
That's
I write-
www
Yeah,
https://
yeah,
www.linkedin.com.
all of those
Same,
things.
yeah, same for trellis.net.
Good luck spelling my last name. Maybe it'll be in the show notes so people
I'll
can
put
find
it
it.
I'll put it all in the show notes. You can just click a button. I'm here for the people.
Awesome.
Well, John, hang on. Shmeya.
Yeah, you got it again.
John Shmeya,
100%.
Vice President of Circularity from the Trellis Group. I really appreciate you coming on, and we'll have
Thanks,
to have
Adam.
you on again. This has been great.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks.